So let me just introduce Gigi Matthews. And I should actually, Patty, you want to spotlight pin Gigi for everybody? So Gigi is going to be talking tonight about the economics of the fiber arts. It's time to change the way we make and appreciate textiles. And let me just assure you that this is not, as Gigi and I have talked, not a negative talk at all, but actually a very positive talk about sustainability and the environment. And I think you're going to learn quite a bit. And I am so thrilled that so many people took this seriously enough to sign up for the talk. So Gigi's interest in fiber arts and textiles is a result of 3 decades of travel over 30 countries. She learned to spin while living in London, England, with access to UK rare breeds. She is a herbalist with a soft spot for plant fibers and natural dyeing. Gigi has sold yarns on Etsy and in markets, has published articles on spinning in Ply magazine and Shuttle, Dye, and Spindle Pot, and was thrilled to be awarded 2 ribbons for spinning at MAFA in 2019. Her recent focus is on making use of reclaimed and recycled materials. And let me just put in an additional plug. Gigi is teaching how many courses at MAFA? 4 at least? 4 courses at MAFA on spinning different sheep breeds according to the regions from which they come. Is that correct?
Oh, it's basically, well, we had to change it, Sarah, because when it went to being an online course instead of in person, it would have been a 2.5-day workshop. We're all sitting with our spinning wheels in a big circle. Online, it was like, oh, nobody wants to sit for longer than 2 hours. So we changed it. I'll be going around the world, split into 4 different parts. I'll talk about the fibers and the textiles associated with each of the 33 countries I've been to, share some of my photos and my crazy travel stories. And it's sort of open now to anybody with an interest in textiles, because we won't have as much time to do blending and spinning. So it's geared towards spinners, but I think anybody who likes fiber and textile will still have fun.
Yeah, that's excellent. It's more encompassing. So I'm going to ask everyone to mute. And also, if you have questions, please put them in the chat, and Gigi will answer all of them at the end of her talk. All righty? We're ready.
Or most of them.
Yeah, hopefully I'll be able to answer some of them. Yeah, so thank you, Sarah, for that nice introduction. And thank you, MAFA, for inviting me to talk. And actually, when Sarah first brought up the idea of speaking at a MAFA Roundtable, I said, oh, I'd love to, but actually what I want to talk about, nobody wants to hear, because it's about, you know, how the textile industry is incredibly harmful to the planet. And we really need to turn things around. It's super important. I have 2 kids who are 21 and 16. I'm sure a lot of people here have kids and grandkids. And when you think about where the planet's heading, it's, yeah, I would say we're in crisis mode. So that's why I really wanted to do this talk. So I'm really heartened that this many people showed up for the talk that nobody would want to hear. So everybody, you know, give yourself a pat on the back right now for being here on a lovely May evening, sitting here to listen to this stuff that's, you know, kind of depressing. But hopefully it won't be depressing, because there's a lot of great stuff coming in the future. I'm going to do that thing, you know, there's good news and there's bad news. Which one do you want first? Well, I'm not going to give you the choice. I'm going to give you the bad news first, but you'll be glad that you stayed for the good news at the end, because I'm hoping that you'll have to kind of pick your jaw up off the floor, because some of the stuff that's in the pipeline in the very near future is unbelievable. I mean, incredible. So in this talk, I hope to give you guys an idea of the scope of the current ecological crisis, and then ideas and resources for guilds to be able to embrace sustainability. And there's a bonus to that, because if you're embracing sustainability, you probably will be very attractive to younger members. One of my dreams is to have a guild that spans a broad age group, and all these 20-somethings who are getting their Bachelor of Arts in textiles and stuff like that, and fashion, would be paired up in a guild with somebody who's had 30, 40 years experience weaving or as a fiber artist. So when you embrace sustainability, you're essentially embracing the #1 issue that's important to people of that younger generation. I don't think that they would be as attracted to a guild that wasn't savvy about these issues. And the last thing is I want to give you, as I said, a glimpse into the future, which, I think will be very surprising. And I would not have known about if I hadn't had to research this talk, actually. Okay, but first we'll take a trip down memory lane. For those of you who are my age and older, this will be a trip down memory lane. But for anyone here that's, say, the age of my kids or something, maybe you don't know what the world was like back in 1912 when my father was born. Back then, there were no plastics. Basically, textiles were about the same as they'd been for the previous 40,000 years since textiles had been invented. They were working mostly from plant fibers and animal fibers, really nothing other than rayon, which is also known as viscose. Rayon is invented in the 1890s as an artificial silk, a cheap silk type of substitute, but it wasn't very widespread. At least it wasn't where my dad was. He grew up on the coast of British Columbia. It's a town that can only be reached by boat to this day because the coast of British Columbia is just like Norway. It's fjords. The mountains are going right down into the sea. Very, very rugged. But still, he managed to be dressed in lovely British wool suits. His dress-up suit was, when he went to the Elks Club or the Shriners, was a shantung silk suit with a shantung silk tie, burgundy. Wish I had it to this day. So, they still had to dress nicely back then. Men wore suits, men wore hats when they went out, all that sort of thing. I'm sure you've seen on Perry Mason and those old TV shows. And my dad, when he was a younger man, he worked for his dad who owned a grocery store in this little town. And my dad would tell me stories about the grocery store, how potatoes and onions came in these big burlap or jute sacks, and he would get really strong by lifting the burlap sacks of potatoes and onions. And apples and pears came in these specially woven huge baskets that would be set out in the store for people to choose from. And they would come with their baskets and they would shop with their basket and then bring it up to the cash register to be rung in. Vegetables came packed in wooden crates, but my favorite thing was the story he would tell over and over about how flour and sugar and salt, things like that, came in cloth sacks. And one of his jobs way up in this coastal town, remote coastal town, was twice a year he had to load up this stuff into a boat, these non-perishables like flour and sugar, and go up the lakes, lake after lake. They're all joined. Most of them are not named because it's so rugged, and deliver this stuff to the hermits that lived in the woods. I'm kind of saying it like there's hermits stuffed through the woods. No, it wasn't like that. It was like only a few hermits living in cabins on remote lakes. Rumor was they were Americans who had done something heinous and had to flee over the border, run from the law, go into the woods of Canada and hide. So my dad was always a bit nervous. They were weird guys. He'd bring his shotgun in the boat, pull up to the lake shore, start unloading these sacks of flour and sugar. And the hermit would come out of his little handmade cabin wearing clothes made out of the flour and sugar sacks, because that's what people used to do back then. They would recycle cloth. Cloth was expensive compared to now. It was hard to make, and you just didn't waste it, So it was normal to see some old hermit come out wearing a white shirt covered in roses, because often the flour sacks came with roses on them. So fast forward now to my mom, who was born in 1937, because my mom and dad were 25 years apart, and she was born in the Netherlands. And that's an interesting time to be born because she straddles the transition between natural fiber world and a synthetic fiber world, which we're now in. So my mother tells me how she was the fifth of 10 kids, 5 girls, 5 boys. The girls had 2 dresses each. One was the one you wore on Sunday to church and all day, your nice dress. And the other one was the one you wore all the other 6 days of the week. Now they also had 6 aprons. So each day you'd wear that same dress, but you'd put a clean, fresh apron on. And they were made out of flax, linen. So if any of you know linen, you know that it basically lasts for 100 years, right? It just wears and wears and wears. So my mom never had new clothes. Her dresses and aprons came from her older sisters, and they probably came from some cousins and so on and so forth. When her family immigrated to Canada in 1954, that coincides with the invention of polyester. Nylon and some of those other synthetic fibers are invented during World War II. So nylon ropes are taking the place of hemp ropes. Polyester comes along in the 1950s, and it was a revolution. I mean, suddenly you had this cloth that could be washed and dried easily, did not need to be ironed. I mean, I remember going to fabric stores in the 60s and early 70s, because I'm born in 1964. And my mom would buy these bolts of colorful polyester cloth, and she'd look through the patterns, Simplicity and Butterick, and she'd make mom and daughter polyester pantsuits that matched. I mean, that was a huge thing. And for her to be able to afford a closet full of new clothes that were full of colors, I mean, it was just wonderful. We didn't think back then that this was going to poison the earth. In fact, these new textiles were not invented to poison the earth. They were invented to actually make life easier, especially for women. Like I said, no ironing, easier washing, all that sort of thing. But now we know that they are poisoning the earth. And another factor to take into consideration before I finish off with my family is that when my dad was born, there were estimated to be about 1.6 billion people living on planet Earth. Now, I just looked it up, there are 7.8 billion people on planet Earth. And by 2050, it's projected to be over 9 billion. So that's a factor when we talk about textiles. So now I'm going to go right into the bad news, and I have to share my screen for the bad news. So let's hope that using Zoom, I can remember how to share my screen. We've all learned so much this year. Okay, here we go. So I'm just going to read these slides. I think the facts speak for themselves. And I've tried to get the facts from the most neutral places like universities. And this one comes from the United Nations Environment Program. So if you're not familiar with it, the web address is unep.org, excuse me. And the United Nations Environment Program has a heap of information about what I'm talking about. Okay, so this slide says humanity dumps its combined weight in plastic annually into ecosystems. That's 300 million metric tons every year. Metric because C had spelled T-O-N-N-E-S. Choking waterways and seas, clogging streets, harming wildlife, and ultimately doing serious damage to public health. As for plastics in the textile industry, plastic-based fibers or synthetic fibers are usually produced from oil and account for 2/3 of the material input for textile production. So the most common material is polyester, 55% of textiles. And it's also used a lot in women's wear, particularly in women's wear and sportswear, which I thought was ironic because people wear sportswear to go out hiking and be in nature, and they're wearing synthetic fibers. Next slide. "35% of microfibers released into the world's oceans are from synthetic textiles. And that's from the Institution of Mechanical Engineers. They were founded in 1847, and they have over 140,000 members, mechanical engineers, in 140 countries. And microfibers have actually been found all over the planet, like Imogen Napper, a marine scientist who researches microplastics at the University of Plymouth in the UK, found microplastics in every single snow sample from base camp to just below the summit of Mount Everest. And they have also been found by scientists in the Mariana Trench, which is the deepest part of our oceans. And from 2016 to 2018, scientists from the Australian Institute of Marine Science took samples from the waters around the Great Barrier Reef, and they found microfibers in nearly 70% of the fibers they collected, samples they collected. So this is the amount of metric tons of synthetic plastic microfibers that have ended up polluting the planet since we first started wearing polyester and these synthetic fibers in the 1950s. So this is an estimate done by the University of California, Santa Barbara. They have the Bren School of Environmental Science and Management. Now, half of the amount that you're seeing there on the screen was released in just the last decade. And this is in part a consequence, of course, of our ballooning collections of clothes because of our ballooning population. At this point in time, right now, clothes release 500,000 metric tons of microfibers into the ocean every year. That's the equivalent of more than 50 billion plastic bottles. And microfibers are likely impossible to clean up, and they're entering our food chain. 20% of industrial water pollution globally is attributable to the dyeing and treatment of textiles. It's from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in partnership with the United Nations Environment Program. There's actually little data on the volume of substances in this industrial water pollution, but we do know that textile production discharges high volumes of polluted water with hazardous chemicals. Greenpeace is doing a lot of work. So Greenpeace, if you remember them back in the 80s or 90s, you know, going against the whalers and that, now they're like sneaking into Chinese textile manufacturing zones and water treatment plants, trying to take samples of the river water and the waste treatment plant water to get an idea of what's actually in these waters. So if you look up on the Greenpeace website, you'll find a lot of data on that and a lot of horrible pictures. Basically, heavy metals are often used as part of the dyeing process, and that includes antimony, cadmium, lead, and mercury. Around 20 to 25% of globally produced chemical compounds are used in the textile finishing industry. And that's the, you know, coatings and stuff that they put on clothing. So textile treatments include chemicals such as formaldehyde to prevent wrinkling. So formaldehyde is often used, you know, in embalming bodies, but hey, it prevents the wrinkles in your clothes. This one, I think I don't really have to say anything about. It just speaks for itself. It's just so shocking. Again, it's Ellen MacArthur Foundation Association with the United Nations Environment Program. Now, this is an old map, and it shows the Aral Sea, which if my little cursor is showing, you can see it's actually misnamed. It's not a sea, it's a freshwater lake, and it was the fourth largest lake in the world. So it's like, you know, like our Great Lakes, right? So here you can see this is the Indian subcontinent over on the right, got the Himalayas above it. Kazakhstan is north of the Aral and Uzbekistan is south of it. And you've got the Arabian Peninsula and you've got the Mediterranean Sea. In 1959, I'll just let you keep looking at that little Aral Sea. In 1959, the Soviet Union picked Central Asia to serve as its cotton supplier. And cotton was, you know, grown in Central Asia for centuries, for thousands of years. But the scale and the intensity of the Soviet plan was completely unsustainable. In 1980, just 20 years later, Central Asia was the world's fourth largest producer of cotton. And now the Aral Sea has nearly disappeared because cotton farmers draw excessively from the two rivers in that region. And I'll show you a picture. This is from NASA. On one side, you see the Aral Sea, and that's in 1989. And the dried up one is taken in 1914. And the exposed lakebed soil is blown by strong winds in this region, and that causes a lot of poor air quality as well. So there's other things happening besides just the fact that the lake is gone. A side note, because we're talking about cotton, that really shocked me in this research was that cotton and polyester right now are actually equally bad. Cotton growing and processing requires large amounts of water, which is especially problematic because cotton is mostly grown in arid regions. They're water scarce. And large amounts of pesticides and fertilizers are used. Energy usage is high for cotton spinning. Cotton doesn't absorb dye very well, so it's treated heavily with chemicals during the dyeing process. And cotton creases easily, so chemicals are used to stop it from wrinkling and creasing. So yeah, it's not, cotton is not good right now. So I'm just going to pause my screen share here, and you can come back and see me again. So I've limited the bad news to just those, I think it's 8 slides, but I could have gone on and on. I mean, because I've got statistics from the United Nations Environment Program and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, like every year the fashion industry uses 93 billion cubic meters of water, enough to meet consumption needs of 5 million people every year. Or of the total fiber output used for clothing, 87% is incinerated or disposed of in a landfill, or the fashion industry is responsible for 10% of annual global carbon emissions, more than all international flights and maritime shipping combined, which we already know. And at this pace, the fashion industry's greenhouse gas emissions will surge more than 50% by 2030. That's in 9 years. Or these 2 statistics from the US Environmental Protection Agency. US consumers are buying more garments than ever, wearing each item fewer times and sending almost 70% of the clothes and footwear produced each year to landfills. In 2014, clothing made up 9% of all municipal solid waste produced in the US. I have to stop myself. I could go on and on. So let's just, we've absorbed this. What can we do? What can we do as guilds? As guilds, we actually have a lot of reach, you know? So there is actually a lot we can do. Now, there's no perfect answer as to what to use and stuff. We have to take a scattershot approach because, as I said, well, you can't just switch to natural fibers because cotton right now is as bad as polyester. So we just have to look at everything individually and make individual choices as best we can. But like I said, in the pipeline in the very near future, we're going to have some great choices to make. So here are some suggestions of what we can do in the meantime. So guild-wise, you can offer workshops about sustainable fiber arts like sakiori, which is Japanese rag weaving. Sakiori, if you've got a pencil and paper, old school, Sakiori. Rag rugs, which we know from like our own European and American traditions. Or you can invite speakers who work in sustainable or traditional ways. So I'm a member of the New York Guild of Hand Weavers, and last Saturday we had our meeting. We had an Australian woman who had married an Indonesian man, gone to live in Jakarta, Indonesia for the last 25 years, learned how to weave in the Batak tradition of her husband's family. And you're talking about this incredibly complex weaving where they're using gold threads and where the textile is made individually for a person so that it can be worn to a special occasion or to a funeral. And oh, it's incredible. So she's a great speaker. Jane Ross is her name. And you can contact the New York Guild of Hand Weavers if you're interested in finding out about her for your guild. Also, textile arts programs at colleges, like here in New York, we have FIT, the Fashion Institute of Technology. We have Parsons School of Design. We have the Pratt Art School. In these schools, sustainability is not an elective that you can maybe take if you want. No, it's built right into the curriculum. Like I said, this is a huge, maybe the hugest issue for that generation. So you can contact one of those teachers. I spoke for a Parsons class, And the professor contacted me because they wanted, not because they wanted to learn to spin, I'm a spinner, but because they wanted to save a forest in Panama that was going to be cut down, and it had milkweed, Asclepias tuberosa, in it. And they felt that if the milkweed was worth something more than the cut down trees, they could save the forest. So they asked me, can you show us how to spin milkweed? Which I actually didn't want to do because it's poisonous to everybody but the monarch butterfly. So that's a whole other story. But you can see, like, contact these educators. They're probably really happy to spread the word. Another thing that you can do is you can offer grants to fiber artists that are sustainability based. And again, that's a great one to hand to younger people so they would have the money to get a loom or work on a project or something. You can create a sustainability page for your guild's website that has resources for your members and the general public, of course, they'll be seeing it. For example, you could include a link to the Tattered Textile Library. Now that's a physical library here in Brooklyn, which a lot of the textile professors use as a resource. But it's also got loads of stuff online. And they've just recently, during the pandemic, started their own journal called the Tattered Journal. And they just released issue 2, I think last week. And Jordana Monk-Martin, who has the Tatter Library, gave me permission to share some images with you. So I'm going to go back to screen sharing. And I'm so happy that I'm doing this without gafumping it up. Because I do the movie night for the New York Guild, and sometimes I gafump it and Kate has to help me. Okay, here we go. So that is the Tattered Journal, issue 2. Hey, it happens to be about Earth. Thank you, Jordana. It's, as I said, it's online, it's digital, it's completely free so that anybody can access it. And I'm not going to keep you in suspense about what you're actually looking at, because you're probably thinking, oh my goodness, what is that? I'll give you a little close up. Here's what is written in the Tattered Journal about this picture. It says, the cover image of our Earth issue displays an artist standing at her loom, seaside. This loom, a 9-foot circle made of driftwood, warped with plant fiber, and filled with seaweed, pine cones, wool, and cloth donated from her community, is a work of art woven by artist Kirsten Rickert. Rickert lives in coastal Maine. She is the mother of 2 daughters and has a practice of making circular landworks from elements of the landscape. This practice is a dialogue with the earth. It can mark time, seasons, or milestones in her life. The artist also has a practice of year-round ocean swimming, plunging throughout northern Maine's coldest months. Tatter asked Rickett to bring this earthwork practice to a frame loom in an effort to merge textile making with her regular conversation with land. In doing so, the artist was able to lift her practice from the ground and create a metaphor for the ways in which cloth and earth are ever intertwined. This piece was photographed by Dora Samosi on a wildly windy spring day in Blue Hill, Maine. So that gives you a little taste of Tatter. Actually, I'll give you a little more taste because I really want to show this. Having creative challenges, which the Philadelphia Guild does, you put out a theme and have people respond to the challenge, and then they do a wonderful slideshow of the pieces. And we do portable fibers in the Philadelphia Guild and saw the slideshow recently, or they can have it just during Guild night. And you can make it a sustainability focus or an upcycled or recycled pieces. Sometimes when you give somebody a challenge and they have to think outside the box, it makes for more creativity, or the parameters make them challenged to think differently because they have to stay within certain parameters. So here's a great example of a sustainability-based project that you could base a challenge on. So this piece was displayed in the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Museum of Design here in New York. Their recent triennial was themed nature, and this was hanging on the wall, but it's a carpet, and it was designed by, and pardon me with names, and I am dyslexic, so I'm extra bad with names, Alexandra Kahayoglu, originally commissioned by the National Gallery of Victoria. And there's an article about this piece in Tatter Journal issue 2. This depicts Argentina's last free-flowing wild river, where planned hydroelectric dams may change the ecosystem irrevocably. The artist began with drone photography, site analysis, and sketching, and then she utilized discarded threads from her family's textile factory, which she dyed and wove on vertical frames. So this is a picture from the Smithsonian Cooper Hewitt. And then this is the photograph that's in the current Tatter Journal, issue 2. So it gives you another perspective on the work. I just think this is extraordinary. Imagine having this carpet on your floor. Oh my goodness. Oh, my kids, when they were little, they would have just driven Thomas the Tank Engines through the landscape. And then here's a sample. Again, this is what the Tatter Journal looks like. Again, it's digital, online, and free. And this is the article with the artist. So that's an idea, the making a challenge. Now this is Francesca, and she's here to say, promote local farmers, especially those with rare breed sheep like me. And Francesca is right on, because it's really good to find out who your local farmers are and share their contact information. Again, you can do that on a Guild sustainability webpage. One great thing that the Philadelphia Guild, of which I'm also a member, because my friend Paige was a member of the New York Guild, and then she moved to Philadelphia, and she said, oh, I found a great guild and I've signed you up too. And of course, these days on Zoom, yes, join any guild you want that's on Zoom. It's fantastic. So the Philadelphia Guild last summer did a trip to Smiling Dog Farm in Lumberton, New Jersey, which is actually on the map. It looks like it's in Pennsylvania, but it's New Jersey. The links for a lot of these things that I'm mentioning should be in the chat, but with this one, I'll point out that the website is smiling-dog-farm.com. So the other way to say it, smiling-dog-farm.com in Lumberton, New Jersey. And Paige bought, they have Gotland sheep, and she bought a fleece and shared some with me, and it's just fantastic, farm fresh fleece. And the New York Guild is having Christine Burns, who's a Coopworth sheep farmer from Winters Past Farm. That's winterspastfarm.com. Again, it should be in the chat. They're in the heart of New Jersey, and she'll be coming to speak at the New York Guild of Hand Weavers next program. Our programs always start in September. I'm not sure which month she's doing, but it's a great reason to join the New York Guild. I have bought incredibly gorgeous roving and locks from Chris here at the Kings County Fiber Festival, which takes place in October every year in Brooklyn, and I have reason to believe it will take place this year. And hey, it's not that far from the Tatter Textile Library, so you could kind of make a day of it, right? Yeah, so there's an idea. But I want to talk a little bit more about Francesca. She is a Florida cracker sheep who lives with Brent Weisman and Barbara Cloud Weisman down in Florida on the Rusty Bee Ranch. So she's not quite as local, but she's not really too far away, because Barbara just mailed me some beautiful Florida cracker fiber and yarn, and it came really quickly. And I know Barbara's here tonight, so I want to say hi, Barbara, and thank you, and maybe Brent's here too. And Francesca represents another aspect of sustainability for weavers, spinners, knitters, fiber artists, because she's what's known as a rare breed. And for those of you who aren't familiar with rare breeds, look up the livestockconservancy.org. Again, should be in the chat. They're an organization whose mission is to protect endangered livestock and poultry breeds from extinction. And breeds are classed as rare when they're in danger of extinction. And this is a particularly important issue in the US because around 40% of all the sheep in the country are one breed, Suffolk. Why? because a sheep's fleece is more saleable if it's white, because it can be dyed like any color. And if it's a certain type of length and texture that goes through mechanical processing smoothly. So you got a lot of suffix here, but this leaves American sheep farming open to disease, and half the sheep in the US could be wiped out, who knows? So by keeping the gene pool of sheep broad and deep, we can keep all sheep healthy and safe from extinction. I'm going to show you Francesca's friends. This is the cutest photo. Again, this is from Barbara Cloud Wiseman at Rusty Bee Ranch. And you can find her contact details on the Livestock Conservancy. I'll get to that in a minute, but she's can send you some stuff. So Francesca and her friends are an excellent example of a rare breed. Brent Wiseman, who's Barbara's husband, was kind enough to write something that I can share with you that really describes the magic and value of rare breed sheep. So this is what Brent writes. Florida Cracker sheep are one of 3 Florida livestock breeds that trace their ancestry to animals brought from Europe by the Spanish colonists in the 1600s. The other 2 are the Florida Cracker horse and the Florida Cracker cattle. And when the Spaniards abandoned their ranches in the interior of Florida, these herds were left behind to fend for themselves. Tough little sheep, right? They're cute, but they're tough. That's my words, not Brent's. Florida Cracker sheep in particular are valued for their natural resistance to parasites and their ability to thrive in the open on pastures considered marginal for other livestock. They are a dual-purpose breed used for meat and wool. Like Cracker horses and Cracker cattle, Florida Cracker sheep are a registered breed recognized by the Livestock Conservancy, and they are on the Conservancy's critical list because of the small number of registered animals. That kind of chokes me up. So again, how we appreciate textiles, if you were to be spinning or knitting with Florida Cracker sheep or other rare breed yarn, the appreciation is more than just what it looks like. This isn't just white wool. This is the whole history of these little sheep who get taken to Florida and then they get abandoned and they go wild and they survive. I mean, this is what you're knitting with. This is what you're spinning. I mean, this is how we should be thinking about our appreciation of fibers. And while we're on the topic of farming, fibershed.org, again, it should be in the chat, fibershed.org is another great resource to add to your Guild's sustainability page. They're a nonprofit organization across America trying to support and assist independent fiber producers like farmers, as well as create a sustainable supply chain from the farm through the manufacturing process to your closet. And also there's a wonderful book on this topic again for your Guild libraries. I'll show it to you when I finish the slideshow. It's called Raw Material, Working Wool in the West by Stephanie Wilkes, who's a sheep shearer and writes about the situation right now in the US with sheep. But anyways, time to move by, Francesca and friends. Here we go. Here's the Livestock Conservancy. And I just want to say that when you go on their website, you can go see the Shave 'em to Save 'em initiative or rarewool.org. You can get a little passport that looks like a passport, a real passport. And when you buy any of these rare breeds from the farmers, and they have the database, the listing in there for you to find them, you'll get a little passport stamp. It come with stickers really, and you can put it in your passport and fill your passport up with all the sheep. So gee, like for a spinner, how much more fun is that? I love that. Okay, oh, flip the page here. So I'm talking about, guilds being able to shift the way that we appreciate textiles. When I was a kid, or my son's age, everything was about designer stuff. Oh, Calvin Klein jeans and Gucci bags and everything like that. And thank goodness we're not really like that anymore. But we need to just shift the dialogue from how do you appreciate a fiber? So I want to share some pictures with you now from my friend Laura Womack. And Laura has has started this company online just recently called oakandlaureldrygoods.com. oakandlaureldrygoods.com. And she's a traveler who's befriended women in villages in Southeast Asia. And she's just recently started selling their work in a fair trade way. And the connection between these friendships is so lovely because Laura is able to share their incredible textile work with this wider audience like us for appreciation. And her friends in these villages benefit as women and as mothers with the extra income that helps their families. So this is the new form of capitalism. We're already entering that age. It's socially responsible businesses where everyone benefits. So here you have a picture that Laura shared with me, these next 3 pictures, of a woman who's making fiber out of lotus stalks, you know, the beautiful lotus flowers that float on the water. They actually originate down in the mud, and the stalk grows up towards the light through the water and creates this incredibly beautiful flower. Here's the stalks, and she's shaving them into fiber. And then it gets woven, and here we are. What a beautiful, beautiful picture. Oh my goodness. And then we get the actual lotus cloth. And again, here where I'm talking about guilds being able to shift the dynamic on how a fiber is appreciated. You know, my friends back in the 80s with the Calvin Klein designer jeans would have looked at this cloth and said, oh, really? It's beige. Hello? Think about how this traditional society for probably thousands of years have been able to make this beautiful cloth from nature, from scratch. I'm a spinner. I look at that spinning and I think, oh my goodness, it's like it's beyond my ken. And all of that care and the sustainability, this is how we should appreciate what a textile is. So again, looking towards resources for guilds, I want to just mention 2 other women who I'm acquainted with who would be fantastic resources for a guild sustainability information. One of them is Susan Weltman, who's a fellow member of the New York Guild of Handweavers, and she's the president of this organization called Weave a Real Peace, weavearealpeace.org. And their mission is to exchange information, raise awareness of the importance of textile traditions to grassroots communities. They're a network of weavers, academics, and interested supporters who value the importance of textiles to communities around the world. So check out their website, it's amazing stuff. And also, Susan Schaefer Davis, who wrote this book, Women Artisans of Morocco, Their Stories, Their Lives, photographed by Joe Coco, published by Thrums Books in 2018. I believe it just won a gold medal from the Benjamin Franklin Foundation. Check it out on Thrums Books. And Susan is an anthropologist. She first went to Morocco in the 1960s as a Peace Corps volunteer. So she has very deep roots in Morocco, rich relationships with the women weavers and fiber artists there. She now gives, I think, fiber tours of Morocco, but this book, again, talking about appreciating textiles, you know, to hear the women's stories of how they create it, why they create it, how much of their heart and soul goes into what they're making. Extraordinary. That's how we should appreciate textiles. Whew. So I'm looking at the clock. I got 5 more minutes. I'm going to just take us into the future now. Earlier, we looked at the carpet that was on display at the Cooper Hewitt's recent triennial show, the landscape carpet. And that Cooper Hewitt triennial show, which was themed nature, and you can look it up on their website, just type in Smithsonian Cooper Hewitt, comes right up. Great search function. There were 62 projects in that triennial from designers around the world themed on responding to climate change and pollution. And I'm going to show you a jacket that gives you a glimpse of that future. So this is what was on display there. This is a raincoat made by Charlotte McCurdy, who is based here in New York City. And for this raincoat, it was a project called After Ancient Sunlight. Charlotte created a petroleum-free, algae-based plastic that is carbon negative. I'm going to say that again because it's a mind blower. It's a petroleum-free, algae-based plastic that is carbon negative. McCurdy encourages the use of new materials that metabolize atmospheric carbon, such as quickly grown plant matter. And she fashioned water-resistant raincoat from this plastic-like material made out of algae. And algae, of course, naturally sequesters carbon from the atmosphere. So the carbon negative jacket debuted as part of this Nature, the Cooper Hewitt Design Triennial. And Fast Company magazine, which has a lot of stuff on sustainability, they selected this as the winner in the experimental category in its 2019 Innovation by Design Awards. So I'm going to stop the screen share and come back to you and keep going into the future. I don't have pictures for this because I don't want it to be, you know, one of those slideshows. But anyways, with this jacket, this is not a one-off. Algae is in the process of becoming the new plastic. There's another company called Algaeing, like ALGAEING. And it's one of several companies working on fibers and dye from algae. So they're actually producing algae thread. I mean, in 5 years, maybe we could be warping up our looms with thread that is made from algae and dyed with algae. There's a Canadian-Iranian designer, and again, forgive me on the names, Roya Aghigi, and she's developing fabric made from algae in partnership with the University of British Columbia. That's where I used to go in my hometown of Vancouver, Canada. And she has invented, and again, I'm going to say this slowly because it's a mind blower. She has invented a living biodegradable fabric named biogarmentry. And this biofabricated textile photosynthesizes. You know how plants have leaves and they use photosynthesis to get sunlight and turn it into energy? This fabric photosynthesizes. It's alive while it's on you. And that purifies the air around you, just like plants do, because it is a plant, except that it's a textile. So it's very mind-blowing because I can't even wrap my mind around this. So like cotton and hemp, algae sequesters carbon as it grows, photosynthesizing to capture carbon dioxide from the air. Microalgae, however, unlike cotton and hemp and other plants, can capture 10 times as much sunlight as these plants, and it grows fast. And you know, hemp and bamboo grow fast. Well, some species of algae can double their biomass in a few hours. And this algae can be converted into powder and then it's spun into fiber. So algae materials are still in development, but they are poised to become the new plastic. So what else is in the pipeline? Pineapple leather. Actually, there's a bunch of fruit leathers, but I picked pineapple leather because it kind of is coming through the pipeline a little faster. So there's a company called, or I don't know if the company name or if it's actually the leather name, Pinatex, Pinatex, because you know, pina is Spanish for pineapple, tex for textile, Pinatex. And it's made from the leaves of pineapples grown in the Philippines. And of course, these leaves would otherwise become waste, right? Because we don't eat pineapple leaves. So Pinatex requires less water to make than traditional leather, and no harmful chemicals are used that are toxic to wildlife. And the leftover leaf waste, because there is a bit of wastage when you're making this leather, it's recycled and it's used for fertilizer or biomass. And Pinatex right now is being used for upholstery in the first vegan hotel suite in London. I didn't have time to look up which hotel, but there you go. Another fabric is one that, okay, it's not really in the pipeline because we kind of already have it, but it's lyocell, which is marketed under the name Tencel. It's created from cellulose and wood pulp, and it's biodegradable and compostable. And the process has a low environmental footprint. It's a closed loop process. The wastewater is recycled and no toxic chemicals are used. So this is basically an extrusion fiber, just like rayon. You make a slurry of plant stuff. You push it through what looks like a pasta maker. And I actually checked with the textile engineer and she said, yes, this is accurate. I said a Play-Doh pasta maker or a regular pasta maker, she said. It comes out as fiber, but this is an improved process. So it's not using so many harmful chemicals. And there are extrusion fibers coming out of the market soon that are completely natural, no bad chemicals. Then you have, and this is my last one, as I got 2 minutes to go, bacteria dyes. And here's another one. It's hard to wrap your mind around this, but it was also at the Cooper Hewitt Triennial Show. They had garments that were dyed with bacteria. So these particular garments in the show were sort of like cream colored with splotches of browns and taupes and light pinks and stuff, but it's developing really fast in the couple of years since that triennial was put together. So the Vienna Textile Lab, which I follow on Instagram, Vienna Textile Lab, they've created an innovative way to use bacteria as dyes. And they've actually gone so far as to make a range of colors. Let me see what I've got here right now. They've got blue, purple, red, yellow, and orange. So basically the rainbow they've got now. The bacteria dyes have the advantage that they don't use land. So even if you're going to use natural dyes, you still have to grow the plants. There's still a footprint of land being used. Bacteria dyes, you don't. They basically identify which bacteria can dye things, which is hardly any at all. So that's where a lot of work is. Then you just keep it in the lab and you just utilize them when you need to, dye stuff really. There's no footprint there at all in terms of use of land. The bacteria dyes come from naturally occurring bacteria. And so they're 100% natural and they're chemical free and they're non-toxic. They're identified, grown, they extract the colorants, and that's then purified into pigments. And during this process, unlike synthetic dyes, no oil is needed, no petroleum, which is a big thing in synthetic dyes. And of course, we know from the wastewater slide that dyes, there is a lot of pollution into the water. So yeah, I think there's one more thing I wanted to say. And this I could actually show as a video, but I'm not. I only have an hour, and actually I could talk for 7 hours and just go on forever about this. This is your homework if you want to do it, your homework assignment. So we've talked about a lot of environmental degradation, overpopulation, all these things that you think my kids are like, oh no, Actually, it's very hopeful because you can see even in the textile realm, there's a lot of great stuff that's going to happen. So there's a man named Hans Rosling. Hans, like well, he's Swedish, I was going to say German, H-A-N-S, Hans Rosling, R-O-S-L-I-G. And he's a professor of global health, and he's also the co-founder of Doctors Without Borders, aka Médecins Sans Frontières. And his work was based on dispelling common myths about the so-called developing world, which is no longer worlds away from the Western or first world, as the old school way of putting it is. In fact, most of the third world is on the same trajectory towards health and prosperity, and many countries are moving twice as fast as the West ever did towards it. And this is the result of decades of sharing of best practices and tweaks to legislation and international cooperation and patient and dogged work of non-governmental organizations. So if you'd like to feel positive about the future, after this is over, open up Google, or if you're like my kids, you would just get your phone and do it right now. Open up Google and type in TED Talks, the TED Talks, just type in TED Talks, the best stats, like statistics, you've ever seen. TED Talks, the best stats you've ever seen. Watch that little short TED Talk by Hans Rosling, and you will have a lot of hope for the future of the world. So that's it. I went like 3 minutes over time, but I hope that that was informative and helpful, and thank you.
Thank you, Gigi. It was fabulous, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. We don't have a lot of questions in the chat, but let's see, we can go through some of them. Patty, do you want to do them? You still there? Hello? All right, let me start.
I see that Charlotte had a question about dyeing, and she had some concerns about dyeing that their guild does, and if it's harmful to the environment, and are there types of dyes that are not harmful?
That's a great question, because actually natural dyes and chemical dyes are both harmful to the environment. I mean, I'm a herbalist by trade, and I had just assumed that natural dyes were, oh, they're fine, you know. Actually, natural dyes, you know, they're actually pretty poisonous, and you don't want to pour that natural dye solution when you finish dyeing into your houseplants, or, you know, it's, yeah. But I mean, so again, we're working on it. The bacteria dyes might be a great solution. So what I would say in the meantime, there's, like I said before, there's no good solution to this question, but we can do our best. So for example, in Susan Schaefer Davis's book, Women Artisans of Morocco, most of the women, it seems to me, and I don't know if Susan's here, she could correct me if I'm wrong, but many of them choose to use chemical dyes because although their tradition is natural dyes from the plants in their area, but they live in a desert, and anybody who's tried both dyes, you know that the chemical dyes, you don't use very much water. Natural dyes, oh my goodness, you use gallons and gallons to try to rinse the stuff out. Chemical dyes, very little water. So them being in a desert, it's actually a solution for them in the meantime. So yeah. Oh, while I showed you that book, I'll just say one more thing. This is the Raw Material book by Stephanie Wilkes. I know Zoom doesn't show things very well, but her last name is spelled W-I-L-K-E-S. Raw Material. I'm dyslexic, so that's why I can't read your questions while I'm talking and answer them as I go by, because I can barely, you know, read the title of the book. But this is a fabulous, this is a must-have. She's a sheep shearer. She actually was not originally a sheep shearer. She was a computer person in San Francisco, like a programmer or something. I know this because I saw her at the Tattered Textile Library for the book launch. She's, again, a great speaker. She told the story of how she went into her local yarn shop and said, so she's a knitter, and she was like, can I get some local yarn? And they were like, no. And it was because there was a shortage of sheep shearers in America. There's a shortage. Anyways, long story short, she becomes a sheep shearer. Like, how incredible is that? And she told this funny story that when you go to a farm, you get engaged to do their sheep. There could be a few sheep for the day. There could be enough sheep to go for 2 months of shearing. Anyways, you, at the end of the day, you're sweaty and dirty, and the sheep are being, you know, being kicked. She goes for dinner after work with her husband. She's wearing shorts and a tank top. She's got bruises all over. And as they walk into the restaurant, everybody turns and looks at her husband, like, gives him a really dirty look. So she has these really fun stories. And also, since we're talking about wool, this is Barbara Cloud Wiseman and Brent's Florida Cracker sheep, and look at, it's buttery soft. A lot of people think of rare breeds as some old, hairy, ancient sheep in the mountains that you can't really work with. You can use it for rug yarn. Not true. Not always true.
Gigi, there was a question about the bacteria dyes and whether you're able to get vibrant colors.
So when the Cooper Hewitt show was put together, because it came out in 2019, I actually have no proper thing in my head anymore after the pandemic of dates, but I know that I saw it in person, so it must have been 2019. So the show was getting prepped through 2018. And the bacteria dyes that you see on the garments in that show, as I said, they're quite pale and they're mostly pinks and browns. Whereas the Vienna lab, which I follow on Instagram, now says, you know, they've almost got that full rainbow of colors. In the algaeing company, they show some of the stuff they've got, which isn't for sale yet. Again, it's still prototypes and they have to be able to scale it up for manufacturing. But they were showing this brilliant cobalt blue. So I think depending on the company and in the last couple of years, they've made great strides. So when we do see them come out for sale, we'll get normal looking dyes, like the colors that we're used to. Having said that, in the old days, you know, before aniline dyes, before the mid 1800s, people were used to mellow colors. So when you look at heirloom flowers, you get these very lovely, gentle colors. And it wasn't till aniline dyes were invented in the 1850s and people wanted, now you even see it in the flowers, right? The petunias are sharp purple. It's not the case with my heirloom flowers.
Right. Let's see. Oh, Karen has a question. How long do you think it will be before the innovations you talked about can be expected to be used extensively by the fashion industry in not high-end clothing?
Yeah, that's the $64,000 question. And I'm showing my age by saying that. That's an old game show, people, young folks. Yeah, so as I said at the beginning, the United Nations Environment Program and many environmental organizations, they classify the current situation as a crisis, like we need to do something now. How many more millions of pounds of microfibers are we going to keep dumping? How many more millions of gallons of wastewater? You know, they say, I read this thing in a news article, and it said, quoted this guy in Bangladesh where they have a lot of textile factories. Like he said, we can tell what the color trends in the West are ahead of time because our rivers turn that color, because they don't have the same environmental protections that we do in the West. And yeah, so please, like, let's get these. I think these things, they really want to be brought to market. A lot of this stuff was developed by, I want to say kids, again, I'll show my age, but who did their master's degree on stuff like this and then are developing the project as part of their PhD or post-PhD. And so they are rushing to get these things to market. And of course, you know, if they do, they're going to be popular, right? They'll make money too. So yeah, and I couldn't find any, it was hard to find stats on a lot of these new companies because a lot of this is proprietary, right? They don't want to share too much about what they're doing to their competitors, right? So yeah, it's a little hard to research, but hopefully in the next 5 years.
Gigi, I do want to mention that there are tons of compliments in the chat that we won't all read to you, but people have really, really enjoyed your talk.
Oh, thank you.
And here Kate says, I will tell you this one, this is a life-changing talk. There was no bigger compliment.
Kate is my co-host with the New York Guild of Handweavers movie night every second Saturday of the month. If you're a New York Guild member, and anyone can be nowadays, right? Me and Kate show these films, and actually Kate picks the films. I'm just the projectionist, you know, and she's taught me all this Zoom stuff. I wouldn't be able to share my screen. So Kate's been like life-changing for me. But it should, this is exactly the great phrase. It should be life-changing because we can't just go on as we always have. And for us, we're just, you know, we're older folks for the most part, speaking for myself. We're used to the status quo, but when I look at my kids, they are freaked out, right?
Yeah. There was a question about microfiber waste. Is it waste mostly because of breakdown during laundry washing?
Yes, it's mostly that, and the Institution of Mechanical Engineers report that I cited, you can find that online, and they talk about how, yeah, every time you launder 720,000 microns or whatever, how they measure it, it's like scientific stuff, get released. Yeah, it's when we do the laundry. And they do now have filters that can catch a lot of this stuff. And there is actually a clothing company, I'm trying to remember their name, but they actually will give you a filter when you buy their eco-friendly clothes because they make a lot of it out of recycled polyester. And in wastewater treatment plants, they are getting filters that are getting much, much better and being able to catch a lot of these microfibers. So again, people are rushing to do something. As my son says, gee, there are environmental scientists. And when they hear this stuff, they don't just sit around and do nothing, you know, they do it, but it doesn't always show up in the news. But even with those wastewater treatment plants, which are catching the microfibers, they still have to do something with them. So they're dumping them into landfills and things like that. So it's still piling up anyways, right?
I don't remember the name of this organization, but you might know about this, that there was, it's some place where teens have been it's like a clothing library. If you buy something, you sort of return it to this place and other people can borrow it. And so it's like an exchange, a clothing exchange, rather than just, the waste. I think that's another thing, that clothing that's made to be disposable almost.
Yeah, that's where I noticed there's also a thrift store online, trying to remember the name of it. But you can Google search these things, they pop up. Same thing, it's like people just send us your clothes, they'll give you the mailing label for free and you just mail it to them. And it's this massive warehouse, I don't know where. Just, don't buy new stuff. And my son, who's 21, his friends, he lives here in Brooklyn on his own in his first apartment this year. Oh, that's another story, but he's like, gee, I can't afford to go to the store and buy new clothes anyways. Of course I'm going to buy from a thrift store. Generation gap.
I don't know if anyone else here remembers this, but I think it was at Convergence, maybe 2010, there was a professor, might have been Lucy Dunn from a Midwestern school, and her students had developed an app for the phone. And it had to do with the clothes, because her students realized that we really only wear about less than 10% of the clothes that are in our closet. So as an experiment, they put chips in the test subjects in all their clothes, and they measured how often they wore the clothes. That's how they figured out this, you only wear 10% of your closet. So the students came up with this app that would rotate through your clothes. So once you wore an outfit, it would identify that you wore it, and then it would mix and match shirts and pants. And it was also connected to the weather, so that, you would pick out a pair of pants and it would recognize the chip for the pants, give you some top options, and that were based on the weather. And it was just I think it was Lucy Dunn. She was connected to, Convergence has had these speakers. They had Matilda McQuaid, I think Extreme Textiles, when she did that exhibit, and then Lucy Dunn. And then a couple of years ago in Milwaukee, they had Juan Estroza from Cornell, who was talking about embedding copper nanoparticles into fibers that could cause the fibers to change color or have conductivity without dyeing. And his point was exactly what Gigi said about the rivers being the colors. And this way, the garment could have connectivity, or it could change color without having to dye the fabric. And so this nano, embedding it at the fiber level as a nanoparticle was like the next leap. So I've always been really interested in the technology, textiles, and the component of being more earth friendly is really, really interesting.
Wow, this is Sally, right?
Yeah.
I can't see everybody's boxes. Hi, Sally. So Sally is a member of the New York Guild and other guilds. She's also the editor of the Handweavers Guild of America's magazine, Spindle, Shuttle, and Dye Pot. And Sally is just a fountain of information, and so is the magazine. And Sally, that's mind-blowing. Like, see, again, I can't even wrap my mind around that. And that's also something like how my kids think. Like when my son was 4, the iPhone came out, 2008, and he asked me a question and I said, I don't know. And he goes, yes, you do. He's 4. I'm like, no, I don't. He's like, yes, you do. All the answers are in your back pocket. And he meant my iPhone that could access the internet. This is how that generation thinks. So I'm not surprised that they're coming up with apps about, measuring how much you wear your clothes and being able to like move forward from that into the next step. That's why I have so much hope for that we will get through this crisis. It's like the ozone layer in 1985. They discovered the hole in the ozone. I was 21 years old. I remember reading the headline, just being terrified. I thought, oh no, it's going to be like one of those Charlton Heston science fiction movies, like we're all going to die of radiation poisoning in 10 or 20 years, like all of us, like a science fiction. I was seriously terrified. But what happens? Scientists get the word out. Governments ban CFCs. The United Nations steps in and makes those treaty things, whatever they do, like every country signed on to it. Now the hole in the ozone layer, which was over Antarctica, is almost healed. And the only reason it's not healed is because there's one chlorofluorocarbon, which is still being used, but it's still healing anyway. So I think this is a hole in the ozone situation right now, I think.
We have another question here, Gigi. What happens to fashions that are not purchased? When I shop, I see horrible fashions that I wonder who would ever buy.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. So stores like, hang on, I'm gonna turn on my lamp because it got dark here. Just wanna not turn funny colors in the dying light. So, yeah. So what happens is some of it gets sent to poor countries like in Africa, which is lovely, right? I mean, en masse, like there are organizations that do this. But then of course, if these clothes are 55% polyester and covered with, you know, treatments and blah, 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 then that becomes their problem to dispose of at the end of the life of the fabric. So that pollutes their land. I think my statistic was like 9% of solid waste in municipal dumps in the US right now is coming from clothing. It either gets dumped in a landfill or incinerated. And H&M, which has something like 5,000 stores around the world, they were really called to task on that one, especially by the young people on Instagram, you know, and influencers. And so H&M has now become one of the leading retailers for coming up with these fabrics made out of waste materials, you know, vegetable discards, things like that. They'll come out with a little mini collection and they'll try it out, they'll put it up for sale. And they're really trying to like work through what are these technologies that we can actually scale up and have mass produced clothing made in a more environmentally friendly way. To produce even a natural fiber like flax linen into clothing, there's still some kind of carbon footprint because it ends up being made in a factory, blah, blah, blah. So until we get solar powered factories, you know. So yeah, right now, I think the solution is, which a lot of the young people do, is just don't buy any more new clothes. Just make use of what there is. Take the clothing that you've already made. Be careful about what you wear. Make sure that it's, you know, as sturdy as you can so that it will last you for years. Tatter Textile Library had a workshop recently called Narrative Mending. So it was this woman who, when she got a hole in her jeans, would take embroidery floss and stitch it up, but make it into a nice flower, some kind of pattern, and use a nice patch on it. And over 14 years, these jeans became the most colorful, beautiful jeans that you would pay whatever to buy them, but you can't because you have to make them. So yeah, what I'm wearing right now, this comes from a store in my hometown called Maiwa.com, MAIWA.com. And this woman who owns a store 25 years ago was like one of those travelers who ends up in India. And she ends up partnering with people in India to make clothes in a sustainable way. So this is hand spun, hand dyed, hand woven, hand sewn. I can only afford it when it's in the bargain bin. So I don't have many pieces of Maiwa clothes, but this will last me like for the rest of my life. And again, going back to my mom's generation where the linen dresses and aprons were lasting through multiple generations, but it also means that they didn't get any new clothes, right? So I don't think my kids want here, you know, well, actually they're boys, but, you know, have my dress. Like we have to kind of change the whole way that we think about everything, which is really hard, right?
You know, Amanda Robinette, who's going to be giving a talk at MAFA on sakiori, Japanese rag weaving, talked to our guild and taught a course several years ago. And probably the biggest thing that stuck with me was, which I had never given any thought to, was how terrible polyester was. And so I started to watch what I bought. And I was surprised, at least then, how many garments had some component of polyester in them. It was, you know, kind of an eye opener.
Yeah, I buy when I need something now, I tend to buy linen.
Mm-hmm.
And linen wrinkles, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, they put a lot of synthetic blends into cotton, like cotton poly, just simply so that it doesn't wrinkle. So I'm like, you know what? It's a natural plant thing, it wrinkles. Yeah. It should be a badge of honor. Look, my clothing is wrinkling. But having said that, I mean, I live in the Bed-Stuy neighborhood of Brooklyn, and it's a low-income area. And a lot of my friends are, say, you know, immigrants from the Dominican Republic. They work at minimum wage. They do not have the money to go to Maywa and shop in the bargain bin. You know what I mean? Like, they are buying from the dollar store and little clothing outlets, and all of that stuff is made in China, and it's all synthetic, and that's what makes it cheap and wearable. And as I said, right now, there are no good choices because we all have budgets. You know, I'm in the medium budget. I can sort of splurge, but I'm not rich, you know, and we're all in, and if when I'm retired in 10 years, I'll be on the, I can't splurge budget. And yeah, we have to do the best we can and hope for these global solutions to come through.
We do have another question here. Is incineration as bad as landfill disposal?
You know, I was going to look that one up. As I said, it's hard to find data on this stuff, and Greenpeace has done a lot of like secret sneaking around, trying to, you know, measure the wastewater out of Chinese factories and stuff like that. Incineration, again, you know, like that's something that, I mean, I know in New York, we just send our garbage out to other states, to be honest. I think we send it as far as Texas in some cases. And we're just like, whatever, I don't care what you do with it. And it's really hard to find data on this. So if anyone does find data, like share it. You know, I'm thinking Greenpeace has done a whole series of reports, and I didn't have time to read through every single one of them, but there might be something in those Greenpeace reports. There might be something buried in the EPA literature. But yeah, it's hard to find, you know.
Generation puts CO2 into the air for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, what do we have here, Patty? We have
Pretty much
Lindsay here. One more?
up to any questions. I hope everyone realizes you can copy the chat to get all those wonderful links. And then we're also, I think Margaret just posted something that had all the links.
I'll copy them all in again. And then also what I was mentioning is when we post the link to the recording, we'll put a document with some notes and all the links. So if you didn't catch them all here, we'll have all those up on the MAFA website.
And you can let you know, let your fellow guild members know when this that this will be posted on the website. We do have one more comment here from Lindsay. Super cheap textile donations can kill off the local textile industry. So be careful how you donate. Oops, and we have some more messages.
Yeah, Lindsay. Hi, Lindsay. That's a really good point. That speaks exactly to what I was saying, where there are no easy answers currently in the situation we're in. When you look at every single possibility, should I buy this? Should I do that? There's just no good answer. So it's like that concept of ahimsa in yoga. Try to do as little harm as possible, but you're still going to do harm, you know? And yeah, so that's why I was like, let's glimpse into the future. We've got these carbon neutral or, you know, negative carbon things coming through. Let's hope it comes through in time. In the meantime, just assess, just be very conscious of your choices and do the best you can.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And Gigi, thank you once again. It was fabulous.
Thank you for letting me
Really
talk about this stuff. Oh my goodness, thank you.
I think you'll probably be getting some more questions. I know I'm going to pester you about something. I'll surprise you. All right. That's it. Any other questions? I can't see raised hands or anything because there's so many people in the gallery, but anyway, lots more compliments.
Kudos.
Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Bye all. Thanks so much for coming. Hi, bye.
For coming.